So, let's talk about primer and the importance of knowing what primer to do for which project. Now, generally most modelers will want a good general purpose primer. Usually it means something you can either put through an airbrush or something you can rattle can. And for that, we're going to use these two. Now, the miniatures that are on top of these are to show the coverage and look of these primers. This is Mr. Hobby, Mr. Surfacer 1000, and Tamiya Fine Surface Primer L, the white version. The difference between these is that, as you can see from our work buddy here, Mr. Surfacer is made to go over gaps and imperfections and scratches that are on top of the surface. So some 3D printed models, it's good for pewter and some older plastic models as well. Or if you work with a lot of old Plomo kits, same way. This stuff's great. It's pretty cheap. Comes in super handy. And of course, since it comes in gray, you can buy it in this form or in bottle form, and you can run it through an airbrush. I really recommend this. They do make higher grits than 1000, but this is probably the highest I would go for most things that doesn't obscure detail. But Mr. Surfacer's fantastic stuff. It's become my favorite primer probably ever, but while it is a super good primer, there's always other options, of course. Let's go over all those options. And then we have Tamiya Fine Surface Primer L. There's Fine Surface Primer L, there's a gray variant as well. The Fine is used for a variety of different things, mostly, again, for scale modeling and Plomo. But it's really nice for miniatures as well. This stuff does really good over pewter, really good over die cast, and really good over plastic. And of course, it's in a flat white finish. We'll of course use this for an example. And it covers super nice. It goes on smooth. It dries a nice white finish. You're able to do pretty much anything you probably would want to do with a white primer with it. So there is that. And this is a good option. This is one of the better white options you have out there, because most white primers don't cover the greatest. This covers good. This and the Mr. Hobby both have comfort tips, which are nice and they're easy to clean too. You can just pop these off, throw them in some mineral spirits, and you'll be good. Now we're going to get into some of the more odd and obscure and weird products, which is two options by the Army Painter. Now, the Army Painter is a European brand of budget hobby paints. What they were designed for essentially is to do miniature work, not usually designed with scale modeling in mind, but they're similar hobbies. So I have one of the older cans and one of the newer cans. They're essentially the same product. They haven't really changed that much. So just a little bit nicer looking. Now, the advantage that Army Painter has, of course, is that they're a product designed to compete with Citadel, and almost every color they have matches a Citadel color. What makes it nice is colored primers. This is their color, Wolf Gray. What it's supposed to be is a good reference to Rust Gray or Space Wolf Gray. And you get a lot of primer in here, and this is a really good way to army paint models. I've used this to paint a couple of my armies, and this stuff's super effective, especially if you have a game night coming up and you're trying to get as many minis painted as possible. This stuff's great. I don't like the lid system, but let me explain why I dislike the lid system. You're going to be army painting with these for the most part, meaning you're going to be using them as regular products. You're not going to be really going back and forth that much for what this is. So you have to kind of pry the screwdriver in here to get the lid off. It's kind of a pain. It's an absolute pain to get off. Because small screwdrivers don't work, and you have to do things that are relatively aggressive to pry these off. You get out a big screwdriver. You gotta, wiggle it around, You can do that. Just, you know, just not worth it. But once you do get the lid off, again, a nice comfort tip on it. You get a lot in here. Like, this is bigger than even most traditional spray paints. So super nice. I do recommend it if you're going to be doing a lot of, well, like heavy army painting. But of course the lids do make this cumbersome. There's no way really to get these off in a good way. So you're either gonna have to commit to using the entire product in one go. I'm glad it seals up nice, but I've never been able to get these to work properly. The only other complaint I have with these is that they really don't, they have a good spray anyway tip. Like, you can hold them down, underneath, or side to side, and they're still gonna spray fine. The problem with them is the fact that, like most primers, you're gonna need to do a couple coats. They may not turn out the best. Here's another color that's very common. This is their color, green skin. It's made for orcs. I think it's a little dark for orcs, so I used it for my Sons of Medusa kill team. And it actually is a very nice green for Sons of Medusa. That's probably the best thing you could use it for, really, is certain Space Marine chapters like Salamanders or the Sons of Medusa that require, again, that specific type of green. But a little dark for orcs. But color primer green skin. Pretty nice. And again, that annoying way of having to pry this off. These are not new cans, mind you. These are cans I've had sitting on my shelf for a while. I bought them to, again, you know, paint like one or two things, paint like, you know, 10 models, and that was the extent of it. That was easier. But same way, nice good spray anyway tip. You can see I've used this can more than I have the gray. And this is nice. It does give you an always test on one model first. And that's good advice. That's useful. A 400 milliliter can, this stuff, you do get a lot of paint in these. And really, for the price you pay, it's not that bad. Because you gotta understand something. When you prime a miniature for any war game or any game in general, most miniatures are 1 to 2 inches tall. You're not using that much primer out of this can. This is enough to paint an entire army. And this is the option I usually recommend for newcomers to the Warhammer hobby as well. Where we do primarily focus on Plomo here, this is a good option. If you're trying to paint any kit, including traditional Plomo kits, but you don't want to have to use a regular primer and then spray over because you may not trust your process, or you don't like it, you don't want to do that, these are good options. Because they spray fine. They're not formulated like paint. They are formulated as a primer. We're going to get into that when we get back here to this Krylon, what the difference is. But these are formulated directly as primer, not as paint. So therefore, they will go on the model better. They'll be thicker. And if you want to paint over top of these, you can, because they act as an actual primer, which is nice. And also, it's good for doing effects with certain metallic colors as well. And then we got the good old standard Vallejo black and Vallejo gray primer. These are your traditional airbrush primers. They're on acrylic polyurethane. Standard, what's used on most things. They're water-based. They're super nice. They're smooth. I've had no problems with this. This is what I've used through most of my hobby career. I have no complaints. We have a custom kit bash Space Wolf model I did. And since the majority of his armor is going to be black, I figured I would just prime him with black surface primer, and it's worked fine. It's turned out perfectly fine. As you can see, the Vallejo primer does have a little bit of a sheen to it. So this stuff's great though. It's water-based. It never separates that much. It has a tip that I don't think is that great because it's at an angle. The spout is right here. And what that means is that when you go to dump it into your airbrush cup, in theory it's supposed to cover better, but it really doesn't cover better. What am I saying? It's supposed to pour in better, but really it doesn't. It's gonna be the same either way. But in my years of painting, I've only gone through maybe 3 bottles of this. And I've got one on my shelf behind me as a stock product too, and it's good to keep stocked up on. If you do a lot of airbrush painting, which I do, and I'm sure some more novice hobbyists do, both of these are lifesavers to have on your shelf. But be careful, because the gray sometimes can separate more than the black, so make sure you shake it really good before you use it. And here I did a zenithal highlight using both the black and the gray Vallejo primers, just to show that they cover really well. And here's the gray. And here's what I mean by it separates a lot. You'll get areas like this where it just separates at the top. Just give it a quick shake. Make sure there's no bubbles in it before you pour it or anything like that. Your best bet, honestly, is to probably get some agitators and put them in the bottom of this, because this gray will separate out super quick and will look super odd when it is sprayed. It'll still spray, but it'll spray on in a weird way. And of course, you've got your instructions in multiple languages, but I swear by Vallejo primer. This is my go-to primer for almost anything. No matter what the project is, I usually will use Vallejo primer. Unless I'm using chemical-based paints. Let me get you guys adjusted here for a minute. There we go. I had to adjust the camera a bit so that you guys could still see what I was doing. So, then you get chemical-based paints like Mr. Hobby and Tamiya. Tamiya, you can buy jars of Tamiya primer, same way you can Mr. Hobby. I would show that, but I currently don't have any. So, but here I have Mr. Hobby's Aqueous Surfacer. I use Mr. Hobby's Aqueous line more than I do their actual regular line, given my living arrangement. So, the Surfacer 500 is good because, again, the reason you'll want this, or you'll want this, and this, and this, all at the same time in your arsenal is because depending on the product you're using, you're going to want the right base for it. This is made for Mr. Hobby's Aqueous paint line. What that means is that the Aqueous paint line, while being water-based, I wouldn't use any generic water-based primer with it. As a general rule of thumb with most hobby products, you want to use the primer or thinner that's manufactured by the manufacturer of the product, so that way you can get the best results. In this way, it actually is really useful, because this makes your Aqueous paint look better. Because them being both the same chemical compounds, you're able to mix them better. They both rinse off in water. They're easier to work with. And this stuff will last forever. I bought this, I believe, the middle of last year for a competition piece. And I've got, well, I'm not going to peel that off because it's going to be a mess. And I'm currently hovering over a unfinished part of my floor, so. But I have about this much of the actual bottle left. And this stuff lasts forever. Again, it's a dime-sized amount will go a super long way. Great paint though. I swear by Aqueous constantly. This is my main primer. This is what I use the most. And this is what I use the second most. But again, your mileage may vary. Generally what you'll want to keep in mind when you buy this is that you have to buy Mr. Hobby's Aqueous paints or use other water-based acrylics over it. You can't, I wouldn't put enamels over this, and I wouldn't put enamels over something like a surface primer. If you're going to put primer over, if you're going to put enamel over this, I would use something a little more abrasive like Mr. Surfacer, the traditional Mr. Hobby primer, or Tamiya. I wouldn't use this since it's water-based. You may have some weird flashing or weird coverage effects. Now we get into a product I didn't really care for that much, but upon kind of using it a little more often, especially as more of a brush-on product and less of a spray, because again, you know, we make leaps and bounds in our hobbies, and you know, going in with a little less of a harsh judgment, we have the Army Painter's Air Primer. It's not bad. It's not amazing, but it's not bad. As you can see, I've not gone through a whole bottle of this yet, and I've had this for like 2 years. It's not a bad product. It works okay. The nice thing is that it comes in a medium gray and not a dark gray, so you kind of have sort of an in-between to play with between traditional gray, black, and this. But it's not bad. It's not as bad as I initially thought it was. Of course, again, the more skills and more things you get as a hobbyist, the more you advance, the more you realize that maybe your product's not as awful as you think it is. I don't personally care for it. I think it's really chalky when it goes on. Not chalky in the way that it grips well, but chalky in a way that it just gives kind of a cheap, thin look to it that requires multiple coats. But some people swear by it. It's not a terrible product. I would recommend that you, if you're going to do this, you do the whole Army Painter system. You use this as your primer, or one of the colored cans as your primer, and then work your way from there. But this also is negated by something like this, for the sheer fact of this, you can do your base coat and your primer coat in one step, kind of nullifying the reason for this to exist in the first place. I get what it's for, to cash in on the more regular hobbyist and their traditional ways of doing things, where you'd want to do it in layers and steps. That's understandable, but also it's not a super good primer. But if you are trying to get a primer that's going to cover good when you're working on little details, and you're trying to cover up something as you're painting it, this works pretty good. It has its place, it has its advantages. I wouldn't use it as your main airbrush primer. I would use it more as your, I need to prime things as I'm going to work on certain parts. That's more what this applies to, is being used as something like that. And now we get into the main thing, and one of the reasons I want to make this video. Krylon. Good as a base coat, good as a finish coat, not good as a primer. Despite saying paint and primer, that doesn't mean that it's actually a primer. This is where the Army Painter primers that are colored actually differentiate. Those are truly a primer. They can be painted over, they're designed to have paint put over them, or a varnish put over them. This doesn't. This is supposed to be a finish coat and a primer. That doesn't exist. No manufacturer actually creates a paint and primer in one. What that essentially means is that it's a thicker chemical compound in the paint that allows it to go on thicker and cover better, therefore acting as sort of like it's got a primer built into it. Really it doesn't, but it's easier to explain in layman's terms as a paint and primer than it is extremely thick based paint that is heavy bodied, therefore covers better and holds its vertical adhesion better. But again, that's because layman's terms. And it's not bad, but I wouldn't use it as a primer, because using this as a primer, you know, you obviously don't use gloss as a primer, but also unless you're trying to do some real fancy metallic works, while you will get a ton of this, you'll also run into the problem of this is very hard to work with. Just for a newcomer, you'll spray it on, it'll be fine. If you do a flat, But not every paint likes to stick to the top of this. Sometimes you'll get paints that'll chip, peel. They might not adhere the best. Depends on what you're using, obviously, but still. It's not bad though. If you're doing terrain, this is a way to go. But I wouldn't use it as a primer. I'd use it more as a top coat or a finish coat. That's more what I would use it as. Now, of course, there is always the option of using a flat paint. That's pretty common. I see a lot of people do that. I don't recommend that. I recommend that if you're going to work with a certain product, you need to buy the primer for it. If you're going to work with something like Mr. Hobby's Aqueous line, you'll want Aqueous primer. If you're going to work with a traditional water-based acrylic, you will want a water-based primer of some kind. If you're going to be straight building and you're going to be doing that as most of what you do, where you're trying to just get color on something pretty fast and pretty efficiently, colored primer. And paint it like you would a traditional army painted product. If you're going to go with the idea of you want to test your skills and use some more lacquer or chemical-based products, these are the way to go for things like your enamels and your chemical-based paints, as well as some more abrasive chemical-based paints like Mr. Hobby. I have no Mr. Hobby near me currently, or I would show you, but the rule still applies. So really, when you do get around to doing your project, really what you have to think of is a list of very simple things, which is, what am I painting? What am I using as a top coat? And what am I using as a finished product? Am I going for everything water-based, or is something going to be chemical-based? Or am I going to use a combination of the two? Things get tricky when you start using combination products, like you're going to be mixing Tamiya with Vallejo, or testers with Citadel. You can do it, but then you'll want to use more of a general purpose all the way around primer. Again, that's where Army Painter comes in handy, but also you could probably get away with something like Tamiya or Mr. Hobby's Mr. Surfacer. That is probably one of the better options. It does work. It's not ideal, but it does work. That's usually what I would do is if I'm using mixed media, is use Mr. Surfacer 1000, do my mixed media, and then put a good varnish over it, and you should be just fine. You know, there is a myth that this isn't good for water-based. For the most part, you'll be fine. As long as it's not a gigantic model or some real nice display piece, you should be fine. Hopefully, this helped you guys out and will help you make a more informed decision when you go to start your next project, whether you're a new hobbyist or someone who's been in the scene for a while and is just trying to figure out how some of the intricacies of primers and paints and things like that work. Hopefully this was able to help you guys out. Let me know in the comments, or if you just want to discuss it, let me know. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.